Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to OSW Daily, where each day we discuss the trending work-related topics with industry experts and thought leaders, and today's no different. I'm your host. My name is Steve Todd. I'm Global Head of Workplace at NASDAQ and a founder of OpenSourceWorkplace.com. Open Source Workplace is a community for knowledge sharing all around work. So please feel free to go over and check out OpenSourceWorkplace.com. So my guest today, who am I going to be chatting with? Well, I'm going to be chatting with Luc Kamperman, friend of the show, Veldehoin. He is a great thought leader and somebody who I turn to regularly for contemplation, thought, process, and I'm very happy to welcome Luc back. So I asked Luc, what should we talk about today? And he goes, Steve, these are the questions that I'm getting. Here are the things that I've been asked to look at. So how do you measure the success of distributed ways of working? Today, everyone is thinking about, okay, what way are we going to work? How are we going to work? But actually, how do you measure that success? And then the other one, which I think is a great point and a great conversation, tensions between individual choice, team choice, organizational boundaries. I think we all can relate to that. So before we go further on, let me bring in Luc. Luc, welcome back to OSW Daily.
Good morning, Steve. I'm just having my first coffee, so
You're a
very
good
good.
man. You're a good man. I've got my coffee too. This isn't my first. It will be my last, maybe, for the day. But yeah, no, it's great to have you back, Luc. So I was actually left with Luc. It's been a month since you've been on, Luc. So those who maybe don't know you, what should they know about Luc Kamperman?
Oh my God, that's quite an opening, Steve. Um, I think the key thing that people should know is that I have been for 18 years now, been very passionate about creating a better world of work and guiding organizations on their individual journeys towards a new way of working. And I've done that in Australia. I've done that in Europe. Since 4 years, I'm trying to help organizations in North America, based in New York, and that still gets me up. Really excited to see how you can make changes at an individual level, at a team level, and at an organizational, more system level. Um, my passion though is that in the end, I believe we can make work so much more effective, productive, and enjoyable at the same time. But we just need to allow ourselves to invest some time and effort into do that. And primarily, we need to help ourselves to break down some of the barriers that we've put up ourselves. So new ways of working is actually not necessarily so much new. It's rather a lot of unlearning the things that you started to see as a routine. And I think the whole COVID situation is just a massive accelerator to a lot of that. And in crisis, people are always very nimble and quick to get into action, into survival, do what have to be done. I think now it's the time to really consider like, okay, what can we learn from this? But primarily, how do we then want to work in the future? So it's a still a bit of a scary time, right? We still have that uncertainty about where is it going. We've got the announcements of potentially some of the vaccines. I think that gives people a sense of hope. Um, but at the same time, I think we should not forget that we will still be in this situation for quite a while, right? It's still a lot to be seen and how that will play out, what it actually will mean for are we going to show back up, already next year? Maybe, it will wait for another 12 months. But one thing for sure, it won't be back to normal. I mean, you've heard so many people talking about it. I can not guarantee, but talking to all the clients that I'm working with, I can tell you that that indeed is not going to be the case. And so that means that we have to properly, need to rethink how do we organize ourselves? How do we show up? How do we then work as teams and connect? So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's good times. We had the election, right? There was a lot of excitement and still going on. So Steve, I always feel like when I talk to you, it's interesting times.
It is interesting times, and it's always interesting chatting to you. And there you go, like that quick introduction, and whoa, there we go. 5 minutes later, there we go. But you've just unpacked everything. And again, I think that what that shows, look, is the depth of your knowledge, the way you think, how deep you think, and sort of how you think through every scenario, and sort of bringing all those years of experience to the fore. There's so many things you said that I kind of want to go through, and I definitely want to see a touch on the vaccine and maybe how that maybe has influenced the emotional feeling of your clients. But you talked about barriers to new ways of working. What I mean, do you think what? Let's first start off with what are the traditional barriers, and then how has perhaps COVID changed the perspective of organizations?
Yeah, I think one systematic sort of barrier is sits with the command and control versus the trust, right? That is something, as they say, trust, is built up very slowly, but it can go very fast.
Mm-hmm.
Traditionally, um, people being present in the office gave that almost false sense of people being productive and busy for you, and you could always overlook people and look over their shoulder and open plan. It was even easier to see all those people working for you, but were they really, and how productive was that happening, etc. And I think one thing that we um, have learned is that now that most of us work from home, and let's not disregard that for, I think it's roughly about 50 to 60% of people in the US, in essence, cannot work from home, right? They have jobs that, is bound to a place and a time. So we talk about, the 40 to 50% of people who are knowledge workers who can, work remotely. Um, and then you hear like, hey, we did it, we could do it. And so what does that really tell us, right? And what does that tell us about the command and control? And I think one thing that we should be mindful of is that a lot of our leaders and managers, they haven't changed overnight, right? So they are hanging in there, but probably still primarily on the perceived success of how you manage and lead in before COVID. And so the key question will be, what does that mean? And now also with the vaccines coming, into the market maybe in the first quarter next year, etc. Does that mean that they want their people to return to the office? And if so, for what reason? Is that back to the command and control and
Mm-hmm.
overlooking people what they're doing? How are we doing that in an inclusive way? Like, how do we make a decision on who's in, who's out, who has the choice, who doesn't have the choice? Um, but the typical barriers, I think, that we have all seen fallen away is like people can't be productive working from home, and that was still what a lot of our managers told themselves, that people can't be trusted, they can't do it. Well, I think without much exception, people have shown that we can do it. I was actually the other week talking to one of the larger banks in Australia that I used to work with years ago in Sydney, and they say like productivity is up, engagement is up, even the agile teams that had to be together, with the 10, 12 people, seem to be more productive. Now, what is the long-lasting, effect and impact of that? That is still to be seen, right? But the first signals are there that actually, we can do this. So yeah, that those are my insights. But I'm keen to hear from you. What do you see happening?
Yeah, no, and sort of anecdotally to what you've said as well, any evidence that I've seen is the perceived productivity of individuals. People feel more productive at home. They also feel much more productive at home when they have a dedicated space at home to work, right? So if you take that subgrid, if you look at within your organization and you go, okay, who has a dedicated space at work, to work from home, and how much more productive do they feel? Because when it comes to those focused tasks, they have the ability to create their own office space. They can close the door, there's no interruptions, there's no distractions. They can just simply plug themselves in and work. And that should not be lost. Now, there is the other view where, okay, so those individuals who don't have that dedicated space, and absolutely, are they at a disadvantage at the moment because they don't have that dedicated space? There are people in their homes, there's distractions, there's interruptions, kids are home, whatever those things will be. And what I hesitate to look at, and the way I sort of look at this is in a negative way, I'm like, well, if they knew that for the next 12 months they were going to be locked down in a pandemic, would they lease a space that would provide them that environment? Or would they make a different decision because they knew that's what the outcome was going to be? Would they then be more thoughtful about where they lived, where they moved to, the type of space and environment they wanted to create for themselves if they knew that was more sustainable? Now, if they were given that time and that sort of opportunity to create that environment, would they also then feel the additional productivity factors? Because there's, make no mistake, open plan offices, as you know, when you're sitting in them, they're great to be able to look over people's shoulders, interact, collaborate, overhear conversations that people are doing. But when you need to do focused work, and not within knowledge workers, most work you do is focused work, with little bits of collaboration and touch base, but that's predominantly what that focused work is. Then we really have to think. And if the goal is to bring people back to the office, how then do we provide the space to allow people to be as productive in the office as they feel whenever they are home? Because how do you make that balance? How do you then encourage and tell people to come to the office if they feel they're not as productive when they're home? So that's sort of where my head sits. I don't have an answer, but again, I have all these questions, and I think the most important thing is, and that's one of the things that whenever I first talked to you, I think it was April or May, I first called you up and I said, so what are you thinking about this? How are you doing this? And you said patience. Just be patient. Just take your time. Think, learn the data, understand what the employee wants. And that's where I'm sitting. So I'm asking myself all these questions. I'm not trying to hurry into sort of making a decision, absorbing the information. And some of the topics that you've talked about are so relevant, because when I saw those, I was thinking, oh, that's exactly what is in my head right now, that tension between what the employee wants, what the employer needs, and what the organization needs. Because the most important thing is to make sure they're all succinct so that the organization can improve.
Yeah. No, great point. And in essence, what you touched on is connection, right? To me, connection is almost the crucial word in all of these topics. It's the you touch on the connection with your family. I literally had to chase out my family because I had a really early start. So my girls slept with my wife, and I had to get them out of the bedroom to join this call. That is just a matter of fact, like how we
Yeah.
um, would I make a different choice if I had known that this would be like for 12 months? Probably. I probably would have, chosen something that I can create a different setup for myself. And now going forwards, knowing that, and this is again still on average, that we will continue to work from home for about 2.5 days a week. Well, that might lead to people making different decisions, right, on where to live, how to live,
Mm-hmm.
etc. The other thing is connections in the virtual world, connections like in person. I think so many people, so many different opinions on what is really needed, but generally, people like the in person and face to face, and we generally miss some of that. But equally within my team, I have a few team members who say like, "Hey, I'm fine. I'm good. I can continue this way for quite a long time. And yeah, it might be nice now and then to see each other, but we can connect." And I think the key question there is how closely connected are you as a team? How well sort of, do you know and understand each other and each other's needs? How closely are you connected again to the purpose of what you're trying to achieve, to the goals? Then time and place independency could and should be there, right? And so that I think is a basic element. If you have a good sense of ground health, if you have a good level of psychological safety within
Mm.
the team, and don't feel like you're in the dark, you're isolated, fear of missing out on things, etc., then you can perform. And maybe that leads a little bit to the topic that we threw up for today is like, how can you measure success in distributed ways of working? It almost goes back to the question, why would you need to measure it? So what sits behind, the need to measure it? Because I think, Steve, for yourself as well, you can think of situations where you go like, I feel connected with all the people that I need to work with. I know from everybody what we're doing. I know and I feel that we're all doing it for the same, goal and purpose. Do you really then feel the need to measure, certain things with each other? Or, is that ground level of health and that connection strong enough to move forward? Um, Now, in general, I think the bigger the organization, the more connections, etc., there is again a little bit of that sense of command and control, right? There's a sense of how can we, and I think that will not go away. We still have to deal with some of that. But the big question for me is, with all this happening, um, organizations have to seriously reconsider what are our leading and lagging indicators of success. And without a doubt, quite a few of them might have to change because of the dramatic change in the way of working. Um, I hope personally that we start looking at more leading indicators. What leads to a high performing team, to a high performing organization? What do we need to invest in? How do we envision that, going forward? In other words, longer term perspective on it, right? Investment that comes with it. The lagging indicators generally are there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your organization, Steve, as well, they know their revenue, they know their profitability, they probably know other, KPIs or measures that they have in place. That might still, continue. And back to one of our conversations we had earlier, Steve, and I know you and I are aligned on this. What does success look like for your clients? Right? What is really that added value that you're delivering to your external partners? Um, that is the starting point, and then focus on your people. Success in the end, and in our organizations, it starts and it ends with people. Nothing more, nothing less. And so, if you really look at that, and knowing what has happened to us and how you want to move forward, you need to look at, okay, how do we recover from this? How do we actually take opportunity out of this and start rethinking how we want to, even be better going forward? And then what does high performing actually mean to us as a team, to you, to me? What does high performing mean? Because often, very often, see, if we don't have that clear.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that in the end, what does that then lead to? What does that lead to? The amount of focus time, to very practical things, the amount of time in meetings. What does collaboration then look like for us? Now, primarily more in the virtual world, but what do we expect from that? I think that is something that teams need to start redefining for themselves again. Then you can start saying, okay, and what are here the leading and the lagging, indicators for that high performing success? And then you know for yourself what you want to measure going forward. And that can range from more individual well-being and focusing on the individuals. That can go around effectiveness of managers and how they lead teams. That can go around, how do we actually know how we spread our working hours across a week, and how does that sit for different roles and for different teams? Can we correlate that back to how those teams are managed? Different type of management style, different type of spread throughout a week. How many hours overtime, is killing? is leading to bad impact on people's engagement and well-being. And now the key question is, and that's where we, back to that starting point, but how can we do this if we don't see our people? At least not that much, then yeah, you might want to, have new things in place that can help you to do that. For me, it's still back to that ground health of connection. It's that psychological safety. But even for that, you might want to consider, okay, how could we measure that a bit more? Because maybe in the past, and I think for quite many, we didn't really have much of that. Again, we came to the office, we knew that our 20, 10, 50, whatever people were there, and we had a sense of, control and command and knowing what's happening.
Yeah, and you basically circled it all back that actually we did rely heavily on what managers seen, right? So presenteeism was really important if you think in that viewpoint. But actually, whenever you take some of the things that you're suggesting that are needed for success for distributed teams, then actually you have to really think. I do want to sort of like, there are going to be folks listening who are going to be, and I'm certainly going through, look, where you're talking about leading indicators. So understanding it's going to be different for different teams, different companies, different industries, but give us a flavor of what some of those leading indicators may be.
Yeah, yeah. There are actually two that I guess, pretty much everyone who's listening are familiar with. People engagement and client satisfaction or net
Mm-hmm.
promoter score
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
are actually leading indicators, right? Because they tell something. It's a momentum, yes. So you sort of look, but it's telling something about the future. If your people are engaged, they will invest that time and the effort in where you what you try to achieve, right? If your customers are satisfied and are promoting you, that is a signal of future success, right? But other leading indicators they are um, more difficult to measure often, and they typically come with an investment. So if you look for new innovations or for new markets or for better well-being because you believe that will lead to more productivity, what are the things you think you have to do to invest in to make that happen? And then try to quantify that. And with well-being, you could do that, right? You could have certain things in place that you think will help with the well-being of your people, that you believe will help with overall high-performing teams,
Mm-hmm.
better client satisfaction. The lagging indicators are the ones that we are typically quite used to. It's looking in the back mirror, right? It's looking in retrospective, like what was the revenue, what was our profitability, but those are the ones you can't influence anymore. That happened. That's in the
Mm-hmm.
past, right? That might give you some input by analyzing it, thinking forwards, but that's why it's called lagging indicators. The leading indicators are more aspirational. They are moving forwards. They typically come with an investment, typically a bit harder to quantify and measure. But I think they are more critical because some of the lagging indicators often lead to a very short-term focus. Like you can be very happy with the profitability of this month, but it could have gone at the detriment of some of your leading indicators that you actually want to work on that leads to more well-being and better productivity in the future by focusing on the profitability that
Mm-hmm.
let's say in a very exaggerated way, squeezed out, this month. Does that make
Yeah, no,
sense?
no, no, absolutely. I mean, I knew exactly where you were going to go with this, but it's more of, I just really want to give people some sort of like flavor of what you're referencing. And I think what we sort of have to look at is we think about that leading indicator of employee engagement at the moment. I think most organizations will attest that actually it's highly elevated in 2020 given what everyone's gone through, which is remarkable. That had we said that this would be, we actually would have thought employee engagement would have been lower, but actually employees are more engaged. They do feel more connected to leadership, to management, to the strategy of the organization. I think there is more communication, and almost it feels like with the distributed way of working, organizations have to be more informative, have to be more communicative, which actually does raise the level of engagement. And also employees need to rely more on teammates in this way of working than actually you may typically do or acknowledge that you do in an office environment. So I think they're really important things to raise.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the opportunity here in and what we could measure, and this is a little bit more towards the big data, and last time I think we touched on it, Steve, briefly, is we can ask people how they feel, right? And people engagement typically is via surveys and pulse checks, etc. I think there's an opportunity to also look at what people do, and you can do that via like 360 feedback and ask others, like how does Steve act and operate, and you can do it via workplace analytics. You can look at how much time do we spend in certain meetings. What of those meetings are repetitive? How much multitasking is happening during those meetings? So in other words, how productive are those meetings really? How many people actually show up in those meetings compared to how many people were invited, etc. And so there's many things that we can look at, that are really interesting. Why do certain teams or departments make way more do after hours, and other teams don't, and actually lead to the same or even better or lower, productivity results? And my hope and my excitement actually is that with more of that data, we can bring it back to the people. Less command and control, less sitting that at the top, executive level or in the management level, telling, what's happening and telling them what should and should not be done, and how to interpret that. Bring it to the teams. The teams know very well for themselves. Yes, sometimes you need to guide that a bit, but what does high performing actually mean for us?
Mm-hmm.
What do we and can we then measure? Bring the data to them. Let them make sense of it. Let them have the dialogue. Let them be closely connected, and what can be done more effective in a different way. Test and learn. See in a month's time, what is that? What did that lead to? Can we move forward? And then we're back to that nimble, agile way of organizing yourselves, right? And without a doubt, that we'll see way more of that than I think it was already changing, Steve. Let's also not, I think COVID has had a profound impact, but we were on a path, right? We were already using more technology, and this will accelerate it. But now I think the behaviors, team performance, again, what that actually is, what do we want to measure and why, are really critical questions. And I think if people think, we now, with a vaccine, we're close to back to normal, and let's just leave it as it is, I think that's a big mistake, a very big mistake.
Yeah, yeah. No, it is. And just as you were talking there, I was just going through some of the action items that I've been sort of taking place are doing with the team over the last month or so. Look, and we've been doing a lot of focus sessions with different locations around the world. And you take the pulse survey questions and you do it in this sort of environment where you take a poll with video with people on and you see the result. And then you go, well, why is that? Right? Why do you want to go in on a Wednesday more? Why do you want to go through into work more on a Friday? Because believe me, in some locations around the world, people want to go in more on a Friday because of the social activities that happen after work on a Friday evening. So, and this is the beautiful.
I lived in Sydney. Steve.
I know. So it really is. It's really important to ask the question, but then also really understand the sentiment behind it. Right. And I think the employee engagement surveys are great things. They're great indicators. And I really think if you take it, and don't get me wrong, it is time consuming to do that level of detail. But then what you also get to see and what you get to hear is the real employee feedback and the conversation, the dialogue between employees when they have these conversations, you also get to see who are the teams who are truly connected and who are the ones who are basically not so connected. And it's fascinating to see. It's fascinating to see. But look, I'm conscious of time. I really want to move forward because I really want to touch on this last subject, look, because the tension that you mentioned, right, and you sent this through to me because I know every organization is discussing this, right? How do you well, let's start with what are the tensions between what an employee may want, what an employer may want, and what the organization needs? What are some of those tensions?
Yeah, it and one of our clients is calling it choice with responsibility, and I think generally it's easy to give. Well, no, but I need to correct myself there. It's not easy to give choice, but it's easier than to clarify what with responsibility actually means and the impact of that. And an example I always like to refer to is it was actually an experiment here in the US with a school, and there's a playground and there was a fence around it. And from one day to the other, they took away the fence. And the experiment was that they wanted to find out if, the kids would play further away from the school and that choice, that freedom. But the counter effect was true. They started to play closer to the school because somehow it felt weird to them, right? They did not know what their boundary was anymore. Of course, you've got always the one or two persons who take that freedom and who might run away, but typically people do that. So if you offer a lot of choice, and there's even a lot of psychological research behind this, that can be very overwhelming as well. Like, what choices do you then make? And then the question is, you make choices at an individual level, what works for you, but it might not work for the team, right? Then you make choices at a team level. What might work for the team might not necessarily work for the organization because you're connected to other teams, right? And so it's a very delicate sort of process to find out what that looks like at those different levels. Now, I think it's top down and bottom up. The organization has to define, like, okay, what's our new fence, right? And how many doors in the fence? And so you need some of that guidance. And then you need to go bottom up and see what that means for different teams. And I think in the end, it is um, simple but difficult at the same time. It is again back to that word connection, team connection, being clear and having clear agreements on how do we want to work as a high performing team? What do we expect from each other? And then you need to have that discussion with other teams, right? And who you collaborate with. But it does come down, Steve, to things like, what do we expect from each other if you and I start emailing each other at 10 p.m. at night? What do we expect if the manager sends a lot of emails between 6 p.m. and 12 a.m. on Sunday nights? What do we expect from the different communication channels that we have? It's quite simple, but what are the typical channels? And if it doesn't go via those two or three channels, in essence, we say it's not communicated, right? Because you need to have some ground rules that you agree to as a team. So it does not really have to be that difficult, but it does mean, again, that teams have to reconsider, what does this new normal, this new way of working, what does that look like for us? How do we know we can still deliver on the goals and the purpose and our external stakeholders, right? That we service for and why we are alive as an organization, the reason, to be. And then, how can we perform towards that? How can we measure that? But that sense of connectedness, ground health, of psychological safety. I mean, again, this is one of my passions about how can we ensure that diversity and inclusion is happening in this remote virtual world. Isolation, I think, is the biggest risk that's awaiting for us, because it's so easy not to be connected. right? And it's easy to over time get used to it and not really understanding the impact it has. So how can you, proactively lead and manage a team through that? And again, that is, I think, one of those leading indicators. Like, what do you need to do? Where do you need to invest in? And I think we haven't had really that headspace yet. Back to where you started
Mm-hmm.
off today. Let's let's not sit still, but let's take it slowly and really consider in a profound way what this means to us. And then sense making is what you and I and your teams are doing together. Let's leave it there, but we need to ensure that it happens.
Yeah, and it was funny. I was just joking with you beforehand that whenever I get a phone call, it comes through my head, and I can no longer hear you. So it's kind of funny that's just happened, and there we go. So I'm hoping that you're able to hear me okay. But there's so many things that I wanted to sort of touch on there because it's a case of. Let me just say, as my music just come on, as I said, all this happened before. I just told you this was likely to happen. So yeah, so thinking about that sort of fence, right? Should that approach be structured or unstructured? Because here's where my head, this is the dilemma that I go through. If you put too much structure, it becomes rigid, and then you actually are creating those boundaries and you're telling rules of engagement that may not work for different people within the organization. If you go too unstructured, then how do you keep control, right? And it's really hard to sort of do. So that's what's going through my head. That's what I'm really playing with.
Yeah. Now, and I think we should not see it as a burning field approach. Like, everything is gone and we fully start from scratch, right? Maybe occasionally that is the case here or there, but I think the key thing is you still need to be mindful who you are as an organization, what your
Mm,
purpose is, what your set of values are, not necessarily on the wall, but the set of values and how they show up, right? In the understream, how we do things here. And so what you um, change or what you put in place should still talk to that, right? If you have done it in a certain way in the past, I think it's very hard to fully flip that around, right? And the school is an example of that. You cannot
mm,
just say then like, well, let's take it now fully free flow then. Like laissez-faire. We take away the fence. Let's just see what happens. I think that will not be the case. We
mm.
still primarily because we have to deal with shareholders and stakeholders, and they want us to be in control, right, to a certain
Right, right.
extent of what happens in the organization. But to explore that and to consider like, do we put the fence a little bit further out? Do we have, doors or holes in the fence? Who has the keys? I mean, all in analogies, but
Yeah.
that sort of discussion needs to happen. But I hear you. It's I think that might be different for different. Now it will be different for different organizations. It will be different for different departments. Could be different for teams. And yeah, even for individuals, right? You need sometimes different ways, and that's why as a manager, being connected, again, the word connected, I think is so important. There is already data that I recently stumbled upon that shows that if you have a certain level of that one-on-one manager connection with your people, it has a positive impact on that connection and that sense of purpose and knowing where your people are. Now, then the question is, okay, how much of that is happening? And is that an all inclusive? Or is that attention going to a few and less to others?
Mm.
And there, I think we can measure a little bit more and bring that data to ourselves to consider.
Yeah. Look, we've gone way over time, and I could keep going because just when you say that, and I've got so many questions, and I had other questions written down here to go through with you. But again, we just talk and we
We'll
just
do it after Thanksgiving, Steve.
for sure, for sure, for sure, mate. Well, look, have a great Thanksgiving. Look, I appreciate your time and energy. Where can people find you? What's the best way to connect with you?
email, LinkedIn. I mean, I'm always up for a good conversation, so they can
I know you
also
are. I know
phone
you
me.
are.
Yeah.
I can attest to that. Look, thank you. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and great to chat with you, and I'll speak to you soon.
Likewise.